Hello everyone, and welcome back to TSW2. I'll just get this out of the way. I'm quite pissed off over something that's just happened in my personal life, although obviously I'm not going to say what's happened. I'm trying to take my mind off it by playing TSW again. And indeed, this time we're on the East Coastway route. I'm going to drive this Class 313 from Seaford to Brighton. Because of course in real life the 313s do run the Brighton to Seaford service. In fact, I remember when the East Coastway route first came out, it was long before the 313 was brought into the game, and you could only use, back then you could only use the 377s for Seaford runs. And I think now that they've brought in this different timetable for the 313s, it's now set up so that these trains run pretty much all the regular Brighton to Seaford runs. Although of course the 313s weren't built for this sort of thing initially. If I remember, I'll explain more of that as we go along. But this will just be a pretty basic run to Brighton this morning. Yeah, well, as per usual, we'll be calling at all stations, which are Bishopstone, Newhaven Harbour, Newhaven Town, Southease, Lewes, Falmer, Moulescoomb, London Road and Brighton. I should add that I've got a sound patch for the Class 313 installed, which I think for me the only change I've noticed is that it's got a different horn sound. I think by default the horn on this thing sounds the same as the ScotRail Class 314 from the Cathcart Circle line. And obviously I don't know if the two units ever use the same horns in real life. Think of it. I don't even know why Southern ended up getting these old 313s specifically when they went to get additional units for the East Coastway service. Well, it's not just East Coastway, they also run the West Coastway line over towards like Littlehampton and Portsmouth. I don't think I could do a shave and a haircut with the 313's horn. I thought I could play like that synth riff from the Funky Town song, but no, I think there's other units that are better for that. Anyway, now we're coming up rather slowly into Bishopstone, which is a station that I featured quite prominently in the video I did fairly recently, which was like, I think it was called Train Spotting on East Coastway and Other UK Routes. And that bit about East Coastway was pretty much a direct recreation of the video that Simon Trains made, where he went exploring the Seaford branch in real life. And of course a lot of 313s feature in both videos. And this is quite a curious station because it reminds me of Shanklin on the Isle of Wight, in the sense that it's one of those stations that clearly used to have two tracks, but I think it was in the case of Bishopstone here, it was in the 1970s when the line was reduced to single track. These days the Seaford branch is still mostly double track, but only as far as Newhaven Harbour. And then, so obviously that means they can only get one train through to Seaford at a time. And actually I don't know if we'll be able to see it too well because of the mist and the rain, but not too far from the current Bishopstone station is the site of, I believe it was either called Bishopstone Halt or Tide Mills. And I don't really know too much about the history of that station, but what I do know is that the current Bishopstone station opened in 1938, and and that replaced this old halt that was about, I think, 3/4 of a mile down the line. This train doesn't seem to like when I go into notch 4. Mind you, I'm not surprised because of the slippy or slightly wet conditions. Apologies for that long silence. I've just had someone rudely knocking at my door. I didn't get to explain, but yeah, we just went past the abandoned Bishopstone halt / Tide Mills. And this section seems to be going by a lot faster than I remember, because we're already less than half a mile from Newhaven Harbour. And there's a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to slow down in time. One of the reasons why I'm constantly blasting the horn is I don't know if it's a way of venting, but it's just generally something I do when I'm driving one of these things and I'm generally pissed off. Yeah, what's happened is really has got my blood boiling. And as much as I want to, I will not say anything about what's happened. What I will say is that this crossing here at Newhaven Harbour, that's not there in real life anymore. Because from what I understand, the signalling for the East Coastway route has all been restructured, and I don't know where it's all based now, but I'm guessing it would be somewhere in London. Kind of like how here in New Zealand, basically the whole Kiwi Rail network and the signalling and what have you is all controlled from one centre in Wellington, which is New Zealand's capital. And I'm guessing it's just for the sake of centralisation and making it, or generally making it a lot easier for everyone. Also, by the way, just one thing before we leave Newhaven Harbour. These seat spacings are terrible. I mean, look at this. You can. It pretty much speaks for itself. So I obviously won't blabber about it too long. Instead, I'll get this lot moving again. Sander. As I was saying earlier, these southern 313s weren't originally built for running in Sussex, or anywhere near the south coast for that matter, unless you consider London as such, because London's only about 50 miles from Brighton. But anyway, the Class 313s are actually very old units, because they were built in about 1976 and 1975 for what was called the Northern City Line, which is the strange underground line out of Moorgate that goes up towards Drayton Park and Finsbury Park, that until 1976 was actually operated as a branch of the London Underground Northern Line. And incidentally, there was a nasty accident at Moorgate in 1975 on the platforms that are now run as part of the Northern City Line. Well, that Moorgate branch of the National Rail Network, where a set of 1938 tube stock entered the platform way too fast and smashed right into the brick wall at the end of the buffers. The driver was Leslie Newson, but no one has ever been able to work out exactly why he let the train go into the platform well above the speed limit. But regardless, the 313s were interesting because, from what I understand, they were the first dual voltage EMUs built in the UK, meaning that in this case they could run on 750 volt DC third rail as well as 25 kilovolt AC overhead wires. But obviously here on these refurbished units don't have the lost their pantograph because they don't run under the wires anymore. And so what happened? So the Northern City Line services that the 313s originally ran went out from Moorgate and up to, so they run on Third Rail DC as far as Drayton Park, and where they were then switched to overhead wires, and then they join the East Coast Main Line at Finsbury Park, and then continue on up onto the Hertford Loop, and then I think they would take that route and then call it like Stevenage, and then eventually get as far as Letchworth Garden City. But the service that I remember the most for, despite never having ridden on it in real life, is the one from Moorgate to Welland Garden City. And as time went on, a lot of the 313s ended up getting assigned to other suburban routes throughout London. Although one of them was the strange Croxley Green line, even though that was actually in Hertfordshire, because that was the service that ran from Watford Junction to Croxley Green. And the 313s were also used on like the Watford DC line and the North London line. And by the way, the Watford DC line is the name for what's now the London Overground service between London, Euston and Watford Junction. It runs parallel to the West Coast Main Line for almost its entire length. And then the North London line, until 2009, well, between like the 1980s and 2009, there was a service. It was the route between Richmond and North Woolwich via Willesden and Stratford. But in 2009, the route was cut back to Stratford, and these days the North London line is just an overground service from Stratford to Richmond. Oh, it's a bit early for that whistle board. Anyway, so not sure where I was trying to go with that horn sequence there. Anyway, yeah, so by the early 2000s there were still at least 15 313s running on these services that are now part of the Overground, but back then they were called the Silverlink Metro. But although the name Silverlink was actually somewhat ironic because the livery was A, ugly, and B, not silver. It was this really strange combination of like green and purple, which to me looked very ugly and dated. Hello, there's another 313. And it wasn't just the 313s that was still running the Silverlink Metro. They were still using some 508s, I believe. And the 508s are part of the same family as the 313s and use more or less the same body shell. Although I dare say the 508s are probably better known for working on Merseyrail. And so okay, why is the... I've released the brakes, but... Okay, that was very strange. Seemed like, so I'd released the brakes, but the train was still slowing itself down. It's very odd. Anyway, so the Silverlink Metro was rebranded as the London Overground in 2007, and then the Class 378 units started arriving in 2009. And I don't know what happened to the 508s, although I think they might have been the ones that ended up with Southeastern. But these ex-Overground 313s, they eventually ended up being refurbished and done up in southern colours, and are now used on the East Coastway and West Coastway lines. Although, from what I understand, they have attracted criticism primarily from like locals who have to ride these things on a regular basis, partly because they don't have toilets, and because obviously the 313s were designed originally for like pretty much high density commuter services where average journey distances were so short that you just didn't need, people just didn't need to go to the toilet while they were on the train. Yeah, generally I think with trains that run that are confined to commuter services in a certain city, generally they don't have toilets on them. Another thing that the 313s attracted criticism for was apparently the fact that they could only go as fast as 75 miles an hour, whereas the units they took over from on these lines were the class 377s, and they can do up to 100 miles an hour. Well, they're saying that on this East Coastway route you can't get up to 100. Hold on a second. Yeah, despite the fact that the 377s can go up to 100 miles an hour, you can't actually get all the way up to that speed on the East Coastway routes. The fastest you can go is 90 miles an hour, and even then, that's only on the section between Lewes and Hampton Park. From memory, I think you can get up to 75, or at least 70 between Lewes and somewhere between Lewes and Brighton. I think Lewes is pretty much is almost like the halfway point on this line, even though I don't think it literally is in terms of its distance between either Brighton or Eastbourne. But it's certainly a very important junction station. Anyway, just back to the thing with the 313s. While at least 16 of them are still in use with Southern, the units that stayed running the Great Northern Suburban services out of Moorgate, they all retired by 2019 and replaced by the Class 717s, which are part of the Siemens Desiro City family, and the design of the 717s is directly based on the 700, except the 717s have a very distinctive, a very strange emergency door at each end, meaning the cab on the 717s isn't as spacious as the 700s. And the reason why they've got that emergency door and ladder, or that retractable ladder, is because, well, they need to have it for like emergency, if they need to do like an emergency evacuation in the tunnels between Drayton Park and Moorgate. And actually the 313s have got that feature as well, even though obviously on these East Coastway services they don't need to use this sort of thing anymore. And come to think of it, all the members of this 1972 PEP family, like the 313s, 314s, 315s, 507s and 508s, I'm pretty sure they've all got these doors in the front. The 314 certainly does. And I'm not entirely sure like what's going to happen to the Southern 313s in the future, but what I do know is that now that the Class 483s have been retired from the Isle of Wight, these 313s are now the oldest electric trains still working revenue earning services on the main line in the UK. As I said earlier, these things were first built in 1976, which was actually, I believe that was the same year that the Class 43 HSTs entered service, and some of the HSTs are still going even today, albeit in limited numbers. Yeah, so I think the 313s are now 46 years old, and they are still running. I don't know if Southern have got any plans to replace them, but as far as I can tell, they seem to be working reasonably well. Otherwise, I imagine Southern would want to get rid of them sooner. Or maybe they do already want to get rid of them, but they can't because of various reasons. I know that Bombardier have stopped building Electrostars now, so for all I know, if Southern were going to replace the 313s, they might as well get another round of Aventra units in a similar, so like a same family as the Crossrail Class 345s, London Overground Class 710s, and Greater Anglia 720s. Also, it seems like I'm the only one that just calls the London Overground units as 710s, because everyone else that I've heard of calls them 710s. But personally, I don't like the way 710 sounds. Hence why I just call them 710. Yeah, I wouldn't actually, although it'd probably piss off a lot of people who don't like adventurers. I wouldn't mind seeing one of them, like a variant of that family running through like Lewes and what have you. But even so, it's still impressive that the 313s are still going. And here is the far more modern train, the Class 377, on its way towards Ore. So that would have to reverse at Eastbourne. It's like Swansea. Eastbourne is a terminus. Well, physically it's a terminus station that is generally used as an intermediate stop. Signals will be in the way, but I don't really care. So what I mean is that trains will come in off one line, then they'll change direction and head back out of the same station, but they'll branch off and go on a different route. And yeah, that's what goes on at Eastbourne. And the same thing happens at Swansea and even Belfast Great Victoria Street in Northern Ireland. Except of course in Northern Ireland they don't have any electric railways. In other words, it's all diesels up there and the extremely rare steam excursion. And now that we're back on the East Coastway line proper, we're basically on the home straight. Although I say that, even though this clearly going around a corner. One thing I've never liked about coming into and out of Lewes, especially in this game, is this 10-mile-an-hour speed restriction. I assume it would have been higher back in the Steam days, and they just had to reduce it out of like modern safety concerns or something. But I honestly don't know. Hello, there's a bit of a busted fence and some what look like ancient ruins, which I've never actually noticed. I've never noticed these ruins before, because I've had the East Coastway route for quite a long time, and I've driven on it many times as well. But yeah, I've never really thought to look too far away from the track. I suppose that's one of the disadvantages of not looking away from the track, is that in some cases you don't get to see all the really unique bits of detailing. I say that, but along here it's just the classic case of copying and pasting the same sort of house assets over and over again and hoping no one will notice. It seems rather lazy as far as I'm concerned. No, this is actually the first tunnel that we've seen on our whole journey. Because obviously the Seaford branch doesn't have any tunnels. I think there's at least, aside from that tunnel that we've just gone through, there's at least 2 more before we get to Brighton. I think there's one just before Falmer and another one just before London Road. And then of course we cross the massive London Road viaduct on our final approach into Brighton. The other notable thing about Falmer, of course, is that it's the home of the Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club, and we will see their stadium as we approach the station. And what always surprised me was that the stadium model in TSW has actually got the proper logo for the aforementioned football club, and it's even got the American Express branding. Because from what I've seen, its proper name is the American Express. I think it's like American Express Community Stadium. So obviously, I think they call them Amex. I think they've obviously got a big enough sponsorship deal that they can also get naming rights. And the thing is that that realistic branding I didn't have to install any mods or texture patches to get it to display them. It's how it was as standard. Looks like we're just not trundling, but going past. What just back there? It looked like there were farms. That looks like a unrealistically quiet dual carriageway over there. If you went you would never see this. If you're going to Auckland, you would never see this sort of traffic that light on that city's dual carriageways, especially when you're going through Ellerslie, because you could go through Ellerslie on a train, and the railway runs right alongside State Highway 1, or the Northern Motorway as it's called there, for a fair distance, and more often than not you'll always see masses and masses and masses of cars, buses, and well, not so much buses, but you'll generally just see an awful lot of cars and trucks. I think buses only use the motorways in Auckland when they're not in service, because I don't recall ever seeing an Auckland bus go along the motorway when it's actually in passenger service. Well, I suppose there's the Northern Busway, but that's a very different beast. I always have. Sometimes it always catches me out when I try to stop it. When I'm slowing down to stop at Falmer. It's either that or Moulescoomb. Actually, Moulescoomb especially, because it doesn't help when the. It doesn't really help when the platform is so short. That's decent timing. There's another 313. I'm guessing this one's going all the way to Seaford. Because it's a pretty basic half-hourly service between Brighton and Seaford, and that frequency doesn't change at all. It's just the same half-hourly service all throughout the day. So I guess in some ways it'll be quite dependable, especially amongst the locals. That's another thing. I'm pretty sure that these 313s don't have a guard on them, and the driver only. Mind you, Southern, especially a few years ago, were notorious for trying to push very hard to implement an onslaught of driver-only operation. I say privatisation, that's already been done. And I don't think I'll say anything about driver-only operation. It's okay. Now this is interesting. It looks like these are obviously big ramps presumably to handle crowds going to the football. Because I know that I think when they have match days here, the trains between Brighton and Falmer are generally pretty busy. And I'd imagine that would even include the 313s. Although I think if I was at Brighton and wanting to go to the football, I'd probably wait for a service that was worked by a 377. Because at least the 377s have got toilets on them. Not to mention that the 377s have much better, or the seats in the 377 have much better window spacing. Yes, I'm not surprised that we've ended up running late again. I think it might have been to do with the relatively tight timetable and me being slack. If I was to ever move to England, I'm not sure what part of England I'd actually want to live in. I mean, ideally, I'd want to. Well, if anyone from the Brighton area is watching, feel free to let us know what the city's like. Because I know that there's the really nice beach, and at least one here that hasn't burned down. Volks Electric Railway. all sorts of other things. But I'm thinking that if I was to move to England, I'd prefer to live somewhere that has a direct train service to London. Mind you, it's probably not that difficult to. And it's dead. Yeah, I'm just thinking it probably would make, to me at least, it would make sense to have to live in a place that's got a direct train service to London. I mean, theoretically, you could live just about anywhere in the UK and you'd still be able to get to London entirely by train, although in a lot of cases I imagine you'd have to change trains somewhere. Like say if you were, see what I meant earlier, this platform at Moulescoomb always catches me out. Because I always forget about it until the last minute, and I think, if anything, the train's, completely overshot the platform. Yeah, you don't want to make the same mistake I did. I suppose the only good thing about mistakes is that you can learn from them to make sure that you don't repeat those mistakes. Because otherwise it'll be like the definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result each time. I could make a lot of political jokes based off that line, but I won't. Because I know that politics is quite a sensitive topic, especially with me. Seems like this train only wants to make a sizable amount of noise when it's actually moving. There's that other thing crawling on the wall. That's a tiny spider. Yes, I don't like these annoying little insects. Mosquitoes especially. Although I think in New Zealand these mozzies don't spread around nasty diseases. I mean, for all I know, they probably could be. I mean, they'd probably be trying to get me to join a political group that I don't want to be a part of. Anyway, so yeah, this is Moulescoomb. Forgot to set the reverser. No, this is we're just leaving Moulescoomb, which so I always seem to forget that I have trouble with this station because you don't the visibility, like you can't see all the way around that corner, and the same goes for if you're approaching the station from the Lewes direction, like what we've just been doing. And it doesn't help when the platforms are barely long enough for 5 coaches and you've got a 3-car unit. The only British EMU in this game that I can think of that has insanely responsive brakes is perhaps the London Underground 1972 stock. And obviously you would never get a tube train running here in Sussex. Although I think, no, when the Class 483s did mainline testing, I think that was only around the Eastleigh area. And I think, yeah, that was what the Class 484s did before they went to the Isle of Wight. The 484 is being rebuilt ex-London Underground D78 stock, and they've taken over from the older, or from the now ancient 1938 stock, or Class 483. See, I've just realised that 30 mile an hour speed limit doesn't come into effect until after we go past this next station, which is of course London Road. I remember the Manchester Piccadilly used to be called Manchester London Road, but I'm not sure why the name changed. All I remember is that, at least with that station in Manchester, is that in the 1950s, or at least how the old Woodhead route in Train Simulator depicted it, the station used to be called London Road, and more recently it's changed the name to Manchester Piccadilly. And once again I've come into the so that's nice. I've come into went into bloody Moulescoomb way too fast, and this time I've actually come in too slow. It seems I can't win. Actually, that's a lot of cases where I feel like I can't win. Not just trying to drive a train properly, well, virtual train, but you know what I mean. Yes, this thing's very quiet when it's idling, and that fan only seems to come on when you've got the throttle going. Now these labels, I think they're called.
Cyclists, would you please ensure that your bike is fully folded before you board the train? Thank you.
I don't have a bike. As I was saying, I think these labels here, I think those are called data panels. You'll find them on just about every British locomotive and multiple unit. And I think, yeah, we just saw that it gives a basic rundown, like the weights of the thing and the class. And I don't know for certain, but I thought it said the top speed. Right, that was London Road, which is the last intermediate stop on this run. Now we go across a great big viaduct, and then we're in Brighton proper. Although I think at this point we're pretty much already in Brighton, just in the eastern suburbs. And I don't think I'll bother going any faster than 20 miles an hour, even though I can go up to 30. But you can see that the speed limit is going down to 20 very soon. I remember recently I was watching a video from, I think it was Terrier 55 Stepney, in which he was looking around Brighton and talking about the history of the famous Brighton Works, and trying to look around and see what the site looks like today, and whether or not there was still any bits of the old workshops left. But I won't go into detail about Brighton Works, especially since we're pretty much right at the end of the run. And this is obviously the depot, but I will not say its name because the same reasons as to why I hate Valentine's Day. But now we've just joined the Brighton main line, which has obviously come in from London, and you can see the Brighton main line on the London commuter route, which depicts Brighton in a much busier state than what East Coastway does. I mean, at least in Brighton, you also, or at least in the London commuter version, you also get. They also put the Dovetail implemented Great Western Railway 166s as AI for like platforms 1 to 3, and obviously you can also see the Gatwick Express Class 387s on London commuter. And that's the other thing I remember about this station, is that platforms 1 to 3 can only be platforms 1 and 2 can only be used by West Coastway services, whereas platform 3 is accessible to both the West Coastway and Brighton main lines. The others are just used generally by services towards London, with like Southern, Gatwick Express and Thameslink. And then these platforms over on the far side are used by the humble 313s on East Coastway runs. With that, now we're at journey's end. So yeah, I'd like to say a massive thank you to those who have stuck around right to the end, and just those who have just watched in general. I do hope that you've enjoyed this run with the Class 313, and I also hope that you'll join in for future videos. And yeah, take care everyone, and I'll see you next time.